My boss, my secret love, one gala night ignited a flame. Don't forget to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. The city hummed a post-gala lullaby, its myriad lights painting shimmering strokes across the vast canvas of the rooftop venue's panoramic windows. The echoes of forced laughter and polite applause still danced at the edges of my hearing as I slipped out onto the open terrace, a silent sigh escaping my lips. The cool night air, crisp and clean, offered a welcome balm to the lingering stuffiness of the crowded ballroom. My feet, protesting the hours spent in elegant but unforgiving heels, reminded me of the performative nature of such evenings. Leaving already? The familiar timbre of his voice, a low, resonant baritone that usually commanded boardrooms, cut through the quiet. I turned to find him there, James Carter, the man who had been the unwavering anchor of my professional life for 12 years. Silver now threaded through the dark precision of his hair at the temples, a subtle testament to the relentless demands of building an empire. His tailored suit still held its sharp crease, his posture the same confident bearing of a man who had carved his success from sheer will. At 61, he exuded an aura of unshakable composure, yet tonight, something flickered in the depths of his gaze, a subtle shift in the familiar landscape of his expression. Just catching my breath, I replied, a small, automatic smile gracing my lips. It was quite the spectacle. He moved to stand beside me, hands disappearing into the pockets of his trousers, the usual air of formidable authority softened by the ethereal glow of the distant streetlights. It was, he conceded, his gaze drifting towards the sprawling cityscape. Though, I'll confess, these orchestrated affairs have never truly held my interest. A soft chuckle escaped me. That's rather amusing, considering you orchestrate them every year. That, he said, turning his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't registered before, is merely the necessary machinery of business. You, on the other hand, a faint smile played on his lips, actually seemed to navigate the currents of forced conviviality with genuine ease. I offered a self-deprecating shrug. One learns to play the required roles. A low laugh rumbled in his chest, a sound I rarely heard outside the confines of relaxed, off-the-record meetings. For a fleeting moment, the cacophony of the city faded, leaving us suspended in a shared pocket of silence, two figures silhouetted against the glittering backdrop, stripped of the rigid formalities of the office. Then, the unexpected words, delivered with a quiet sincerity that resonated deep within me. I find myself disinclined to return to the silence of my empty house just yet, he admitted, his gaze holding mine. Would you perhaps consider joining me for a drink? Somewhere less performative? A tremor of surprise, mingled with a sudden, inexplicable anticipation, ran through me. Casual after-work conversations were not unheard of, late-night calls dissecting strategies, impromptu dinners fueled by looming deadlines, but this felt different, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. There was an unspoken invitation in his tone, a subtle vulnerability that sent a faint flutter through my pulse. Sure, I finally managed, the word feeling lighter, more significant than it should have. Why not? He guided me away from the brightly illuminated arteries of downtown, leading me down quieter side streets, where the relentless pulse of the city softened to a gentle thrum. He steered me towards a discreet entrance, marked only by a single, understated sign. Inside, the air shifted, thick with the velvety hush of a forgotten era. Low-slung lamps cast pools of amber light, illuminating plush velvet armchairs and dark, polished wood. The murmur of hushed conversations mingled with the soulful strains of a jazz saxophone, creating an atmosphere both intimate and timeless, a sanctuary untouched by the relentless march of the outside world. As we settled into a secluded corner booth, James loosened the knot of his tie, a rare and surprisingly intimate gesture that chipped away at the formidable edifice of his professional persona. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, his gaze lingering with an intensity that made me feel as though I were being seen anew, stripped of the familiar context of spreadsheets and deadlines. You've dedicated a significant portion of your life to the company, he began, his fingers gently swirling the amber liquid in his glass. 12 years. A considerable investment. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. Have you ever entertained the notion of an alternate trajectory? A different path entirely? His question, so unexpected and personal, caught me off guard. Are you asking if I harbor regrets? He shook his head slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. Not regret, no. Merely curiosity. Do you ever find yourself pondering the roads not taken? I exhaled softly, the weight of unspoken possibilities momentarily pressing down on me. I believe that's a universal human experience, wouldn't you agree? But I've always held the conviction that every decision, every seemingly insignificant turn, ultimately guides us to where we are meant to be. A genuine smile warmed his features then, erasing some of the lines etched by years of responsibility. That's a remarkably grounded perspective. And so, we talked. Truly talked, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Not about quarterly projections or impending deadlines, but about the fundamental currents of life itself. He spoke of his nascent years, the arduous climb of building his company from the ground up, the silent sacrifices that had paved the way for his success. I, in turn, shared fragments of myself I rarely voiced, the youthful aspirations that had gradually been tempered by pragmatism, the pivotal moments that had shaped my worldview. Time seemed to dissolve, one drink seamlessly melting into the next. Somewhere between shared reminiscences and bursts of unexpected laughter, the very air between us began to subtly shift, charged with an unspoken energy. His hand moved across the polished tabletop, a hesitant, almost accidental drift, until his fingertips grazed the back of my own. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through me. I didn't pull away. In that suspended moment, the low hum of the lounge seemed to fade, the clinking of glasses and murmur of voices receding into a distant echo. Everything narrowed, focusing on the delicate point of contact, the unspoken question hanging in the air between us. Then, his voice, quiet and laced with a vulnerability I had never witnessed, broke the fragile silence. "I've never articulated this before," he confessed, his gaze fixed on our intertwined hands, "but my admiration for you extends far beyond the professional realm. You possess a remarkable presence, a quiet strength that seems to anchor the world, even amidst the most turbulent storms." My heart gave a surprised leap, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Compliments were not unfamiliar, but this felt different, devoid of the casual flattery that often permeated the corporate world. This was something raw, something deeply personal. "You've been the unwavering constant," he continued, his thumb gently stroking my skin. "And perhaps it has taken me far too long to acknowledge the profound significance of that." I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. He wasn't just my boss, the figure of authority I had respected and perhaps even slightly feared for so many years. He was a man who had, unknowingly, become an integral part of the very fabric of my professional existence, a man whose opinion held a weight I had never fully acknowledged. Yet, sitting there in the warm, dimly lit embrace of the lounge, my thoughts were far removed from quarterly reports and professional decorum. I was acutely aware of the intensity of his gaze, the way he seemed to be seeing a woman he had, for reasons unknown, previously kept at a distance. "I should probably head home," I finally managed, the words sounding weak and unconvincing even to my own ears. He studied me for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "Allow me to walk you." Chapter 4, The Lingering Echo of Goodbye. The city streets were quieter now, the frenetic energy of the gala night replaced by the hushed rhythm of late-night urban life. As we reached the entrance of my building, an unspoken reluctance hung in the air, a shared desire to prolong the fragile intimacy that had blossomed between us. "Thank you for this evening," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet street. "For listening." A genuine smile touched my lips. "The sentiment is entirely mutual." A pause stretched between us, thick with unspoken possibilities. A fleeting hesitation, and then, before the cautious voice of reason could intercede, I leaned in, a small, almost imperceptible movement, a silent offering. It was one of those rare moments where the world shrinks, the past and future blurring into the immediacy of the present, leaving only the two of us suspended in a shared breath. But before our lips could meet, before the unspoken could become tangible, I drew back, my own breath catching in my throat. "Good night, James," I whispered, stepping quickly inside, retreating before I could completely surrender to the uncharted territory that beckoned. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something profound had irrevocably shifted between us, a silent earthquake that had rearranged the landscape of our carefully constructed professional world. And deep down, amidst the swirling confusion and nascent excitement, I knew with a certainty that resonated in the very core of my being, this was only the beginning. The following morning dawned with an unusual vibrancy, the sunlight streaming through my window doing little to dispel the lingering echoes of the previous night. The memory of James's gaze, the fleeting warmth of his hand, the unspoken words that had hung heavy in the air, they replayed in my mind like a cherished melody. For years, I had compartmentalized him, confined him to the neat, predictable box labeled boss. But now, the image was fractured, replaced by the memory of James the man, vulnerable and sincere, looking at me with an intensity that had stirred something dormant within me. "This is absurd," I muttered, shaking my head as I poured my morning coffee, attempting to banish the persistent thoughts. Nothing happened. Nothing can happen. Yet, as I stepped into the office, a palpable tension hung in the air, a subtle shift in the usual hum of activity. Through the glass of his office, I caught a glimpse of him. He was on a call, his brow furrowed in concentration, but for the briefest of moments, his eyes flicked up, met mine across the expanse, and held. A barely perceptible pause, a flicker of recognition, and then, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a private acknowledgement meant only for me. A quiet storm began to brew beneath the surface of my carefully maintained composure. The day unfolded in a blur of meetings and emails, my focus fractured, my thoughts constantly straying. It didn't help that James seemed unusually present, his path crossing mine more frequently than necessary, his gaze lingering a fraction too long during brief exchanges. By late afternoon, a restless energy pulsed within me. I needed air, a moment of solitude to untangle the knot of conflicting emotions. I stepped out onto the small office terrace, the crisp autumn air a welcome contrast to the stale recycled air inside. The city buzzed below, a distant symphony of horns and chatter. Lost in the labyrinth of my thoughts, I didn't hear the soft click of the door opening behind me. "You've been avoiding me," James's voice, though calm, held the subtle undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I turned, forcing a light, dismissive chuckle. "Avoiding you? That's a touch dramatic, don't you think?" He stepped closer, his hands finding their familiar place in his pockets, that same unreadable expression settling back onto his face. "Is it?" I sighed, rubbing my temples, the carefully constructed walls of my professionalism beginning to crumble. "James, last night was different." "I know," he finished for me, his gaze unwavering. I looked up at him, at the man who had been a constant fixture in my professional landscape for so many years, and yet, in this charged moment, he felt both intimately familiar and utterly new. "We can't do this," I said, the words barely above a whisper, feeling hollow even as they left my lips. He studied me for a long, silent moment, then exhaled, a puff of visible breath in the cool air. "I understand what you're thinking, that this is precarious, that it fundamentally alters the dynamic." "It does alter things," I insisted, my voice gaining a measure of firmness. "James, you are my employer. There are boundaries, expectations, protocols." "To hell with protocols," he interrupted, his voice low but imbued with a surprising intensity. I stared at him, momentarily stunned. This wasn't the composed, meticulously controlled man I knew. This was someone else, someone who, for the first time, seemed to be disregarding the carefully constructed framework of his life, driven by something far more primal. He was thinking about me. "You're overcomplicating what transpired," he continued, his tone softening slightly, the earlier intensity giving way to a quiet persuasion. "Last night, stripped of the office hierarchy, we were simply two individuals. And I believe, no, I know, we both experienced something significant." I swallowed hard, the truth of his words a heavy weight in the silence between us. "That doesn't automatically equate to it being right." He tilted his head, his gaze searching mine with an almost unsettling intensity. "And yet," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "you haven't explicitly denied feeling it too." My lips parted, but the carefully rehearsed denials remained unspoken. The truth hung heavy between us, undeniable and raw. I had felt something, a spark of connection that had lain dormant for far too long. He took a deliberate step closer, the space between us shrinking. His voice dropped even lower, a husky whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "Tell me I'm mistaken," he urged. his eyes locking with mine. Tell me last night was a figment of my imagination, and I will endeavor to erase it completely. The words of denial hovered on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to utter them, to retreat to the safety of the familiar, to pretend that everything could seamlessly revert to the way it had been. But the truth was a stubborn anchor, holding me fast. I wasn't certain I wanted to erase it. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, an invisible thread drawing us inexorably closer. My breath hitched as his hand rose, his fingertips brushing against the delicate skin of my wrist, a tentative touch, a silent question rather than a demand. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to think. I didn't pull away. The feather-light touch of James's fingertips against my wrist sent a ripple of sensation through me, a quiet tremor that belied the storm brewing within. For so long, I had meticulously adhered to the prescribed boundaries of my life, my career, my age, the unspoken expectations that came with them. I had cultivated a life built on the bedrock of predictability and rational thought. But standing there on the terrace, bathed in the cool afternoon light, with James looking at me as though I were a newly discovered constellation, I felt the carefully constructed walls of my self-imposed limitations begin to crumble. He waited, his gaze searching mine, seeking confirmation, a silent acknowledgement that the connection we had forged the previous night was not a solitary experience. And in that charged moment, a quiet affirmation bloomed within me. A slow breath escaped my lips. "James," I began, my voice barely audible, "I honestly don't know where this leads." A small, almost relieved smile touched his lips. "Neither do I," he admitted, his eyes still locked on mine. "But that doesn't necessitate a retreat." A sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees, sending a shiver through me. He noticed instantly, his practiced movements belying a surprising tenderness as he slipped off his impeccably tailored suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The faint, familiar scent of his subtly spiced cologne enveloped me, a comforting warmth in the cool air. "Come," he said, a decisive note entering his voice as he nodded towards the office door. "Let's absent ourselves from this place." A flicker of hesitation crossed my mind. "You mean now? Why not?" His tone was light, yet beneath the casualness, I detected a quiet resolve. I glanced back through the glass doors, into the familiar hum of the office. People moved with practiced efficiency, engrossed in the predictable rhythm of their workday. If I returned, I knew precisely how the evening would unfold, gathering my belongings, the solitary journey home, a quiet dinner consumed in the company of my own thoughts, the charade of normalcy meticulously maintained. But something had irrevocably shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt an undeniable pull towards the uncharted, a refusal to let this unexpected opportunity simply fade away. "All right," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a newfound sense of daring taking root within me. "Let's go." We found refuge in a discreet, dimly lit restaurant a few blocks away, a haven of hushed conversations and soft, ambient music. James ordered a bottle of rich, ruby red wine, and as the first sip warmed my throat, a sliver of the tension that had gripped me began to dissipate. "So," I began, setting my glass down with a deliberate click, "what precisely are we embarking upon?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze studying me with that familiar, unreadable intensity that often characterized his office demeanor. But tonight, there was a subtle nuance, a flicker of something more vulnerable in the depths of his eyes. "Candidly," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, watching the light dance within its depths, "I simply desired to be in your company in a space where pretense was unnecessary." I swallowed, the weight of his words settling between us. "Pretense?" He met my gaze directly, his expression unwavering. "The pretense that the events of last night held no significance." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I opened my mouth, searching for the carefully chosen phrases that had always governed our interactions, but for once, I felt a rebellion against caution. I had continued to the end of the story. No desire to dissect every syllable before it escaped my lips. A soft exhalation escaped me. It did. A fleeting expression flickered across his face, relief, perhaps, or something akin to triumph, quickly masked by a more contemplative gaze. The hours that followed unfolded with an ease and intimacy I had never experienced in his presence before. We spoke not of quarterly earnings or strategic alliances, but of the quiet landscapes of our inner lives. I confided in him long-held aspirations I had relegated to the realm of forgotten dreams, the years I had poured into my career, convincing myself that the deeper longings for connection and affection were luxuries I could no longer afford, reserved for younger souls with the vast expanse of time stretching before them. James listened with an unwavering focus, his gaze never wavering, his occasional questions insightful and genuinely curious. When my voice finally trailed off, leaving a fragile silence in its wake, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in a touch so simple, yet so profoundly deliberate, that my breath hitched in my throat. "You are not alone in that sentiment," he said, his voice low and resonant, and in that moment, I believed him implicitly. By the time we emerged from the warm embrace of the restaurant, the city had succumbed to a deeper quiet. The streets glowed with the soft, amber luminescence of streetlights, the distant murmur of traffic a soothing counterpoint to the comfortable silence that had settled between us. We walked for a while, our footsteps echoing softly on the deserted sidewalks, neither of us willing to break the spell with a final farewell. As we reached a quiet crosswalk, bathed in the pale glow of the pedestrian signal, he stopped and turned to face me. "I have no desire to rush the unfolding of this," he said softly, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. "But neither can I feign that the connection we share is inconsequential." My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "James." A small, rueful chuckle escaped him, a hint of self-deprecation in his tone as he shook his head almost imperceptibly. "I am acutely aware of the inherent complexities." A breathy laugh escaped me, tinged with a nervous energy. "That is a considerable understatement." We stood there for a long moment, the world continuing its ceaseless motion around us, yet within our small sphere, time seemed to hold its breath. Then, propelled by an impulse I didn't fully understand, a yearning that had been simmering beneath the surface for years, I took a step closer. James's breath hitched audibly, his eyes widening slightly, searching mine with an intensity that both thrilled and intimidated me. And then, finally, I allowed myself to feel, to truly acknowledge the magnetic pull that had drawn us together. The kiss was tentative, a hesitant exploration, like the opening notes of a melody neither of us yet knew how to play. His hand rose, cupping the side of my face with a gentle reverence that sent a shiver of unexpected tenderness through me. When we finally drew apart, his forehead rested lightly against mine, our breaths mingling in the cool night air. "This irrevocably alters the landscape, doesn't it?" I whispered, the reality of the moment washing over me in a wave of both exhilaration and trepidation. "It does," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my forehead. "But perhaps that is not an unwelcome development." I closed my eyes, allowing the warmth of the shared intimacy to sink in, a fragile seed of hope taking root in the fertile ground of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. The following morning, I awoke to a kaleidoscope of emotions, elation warring with a gnawing sense of unease, the lingering sweetness of the previous night tinged with the stark reality of the day ahead. The memory of James's touch, the weight of his gaze, the hesitant promise of his kiss, they were etched into my senses. But the cool light of dawn filtering through my bedroom window brought with it the undeniable truth: he was still my boss, I was still his employee, and we had irrevocably crossed a boundary that could not be uncrossed. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with a text message. "James, morning. No regrets, I trust?" A small, involuntary smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I typed a swift reply. "Me, none whatsoever. And you?" His response was instantaneous. "James, not a solitary one. May I see you later?" A moment of hesitation flickered within me, not born of reluctance, quite the contrary, but from a profound uncertainty about what later even meant for us now. Could we navigate a reality that existed beyond the carefully defined parameters of the office, beyond the roles we had so diligently played for over a decade? Taking a deep breath, I composed my reply. "Me, yes, but we need to talk first." That evening, we met in the hushed tranquility of a park on the city's periphery, a neutral territory far removed from the scrutinizing eyes and whispering corridors of the office. James was already there when I arrived, leaning against a weathered park bench, his hands tucked into the pockets of his trench coat. He straightened as I approached, his usual composed demeanor softened by a vulnerability I was only just beginning to recognize. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that belied the cool evening air. "Hey," I echoed, settling onto the bench beside him, the silence stretching between us charged with unspoken thoughts. For a long moment, we simply sat there, watching the last vestiges of the setting sun paint the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender, the distant sounds of the city a muted backdrop to our quiet contemplation. Finally, I broke the silence. "James," I began, my voice low and earnest, "I need to understand. Where do we go from here?" He exhaled slowly, as if he had been anticipating this very question. "I don't possess all the answers," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "But I know unequivocally what I do not desire. I refuse to allow the profound connection we forged last night to become a fleeting memory, something we pretend never transpired." I nodded slowly, the weight of his sincerity settling within me. "Nor do I." He turned towards me then, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "Let us endeavor to navigate this not through the rigid lens of rules and expectations, but through the uncharted territory of us. Whatever form that may ultimately take." I swallowed, the uncertainty still a knot in my stomach. "And work." A soft, reassuring chuckle escaped him. "I will not permit this to jeopardize your career. You have dedicated too much of yourself to this company. If pragmatic discussions regarding professional boundaries become necessary, we will address them with the utmost transparency and respect. But I am unwilling to relinquish the nascent possibility of us simply due to logistical complexities." His words resonated deeply, easing some of the anxieties that had plagued me since morning. For so long, I had allowed the fear of the unknown to dictate my choices, to stifle the stirrings of feelings I had deemed inappropriate or ill-timed. But here was James, standing beside me, willing to confront the complexities, to explore the uncharted alongside me. I reached for his hand, my fingers intertwining with his. "Okay," I said, my voice gaining a newfound steadiness. "Let's see where this path leads." The relief that washed over his face was palpable, transforming his features with a genuine joy that made my heart soar. As he turned to me, pulling me into a slow, lingering kiss beneath the fading light of the evening, a profound realization dawned within me. This wasn't just a night that had changed everything, it was the dawn of something entirely new, a thrilling and terrifying leap into the unknown, hand in hand with the man who had unexpectedly become the secret compass of my heart. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and share this story if it touched your heart. Subscribe for more uplifting. And as he pulled me into a slow, lingering kiss under the fading light of the evening, a profound realization dawned within me. This wasn't just a night that had changed everything, it was the electric spark of something forbidden, something real, igniting in the most unexpected of places. Could this be the start of a love story no one saw coming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to double tap if this story gave you all the feels. Share it with someone who believes in unexpected connections, link symbol, subscribe for more stories that will tug at your heartstrings.